I mean, there are many theories. I'm sure you have many theories as to why that is. I think my concern now, having come back and seen that suddenly the UK is joined in bombing raids in Iraq, potentially it will do in Syria too. And I think the language that came out around that, we were just discussing it a bit earlier actually, where somebody said on the radio the day that they started doing their bombing raids that they were having to mow the lawn in Iraq of militants, and that soon it was clear that new materials would be used to be civilian casualties. So I think it's also going to be very difficult to get any form of accountability in Gaza if those kinds of methods and that kind of rhetoric is also being used by a Western coalition in other areas around the same kinds of actions you may well see in the future. I don't have a good answer to give to you. I wish it were different. And I think that the flip side of that is that actually if Palestine eventually went to the ICC, it could really transform the way in which international intervention operates. Not just for Palestine.
For the Arab one.
Yeah.
Were you there on a brief visit, or were you there working in clinic?
I was in the West. I was just there for 3 weeks, so I was only in Gaza for just under a week, and in the West Bank for the rest of the time. And I was there both with Palestinians, but also working with Friends of Gaza University and visiting other universities that we're now going to be working with, and especially those in Gaza. Because I think we want to be able to, in the first instance, have an emergency fund for students who have lost their homes, and also members of their families that are able to go to university.
Just one question. You spoke of, I think the figure was a 45% unemployment rate due to the bombing of the tunnels. Has this affected Palestinians working in Israeli businesses, and did you see a sense of social cohesion whilst you were there between the two, or let's say 3 different groups of people that currently exist?
So people from Gaza can't work in Israel. I mean, that's one of the big issues about unemployment. The unemployment rate has gone up immensely over the last decade because they haven't been able to access jobs within Israel, which is traditionally what a lot of them were doing. The second issue is that one of the biggest things has been the construction industry inside Gaza, and a lot of that was facilitated by materials and construction materials coming through the tunnels, which is why it's gone up to 47% amongst other things that are coming through as well. So it's not cohesion. The biggest problem at the moment is probably cohesion internally, Palestinian cohesion, and that's the first step that has got to be solved. And to have a real genuine unity government that takes things forward. I mean, that's the bottom line. I think it will, the only experience the people in Gaza have had, and this is very worrying because it's a young generation who their formative years have been growing up under a blockade. So the only experience that they have of Israel is through 3 major offensives, 3 major wars in 6 years. And even while I was there were F-16s going ahead, there was a sonic boom, you can hear the firing. It's very rare that you don't have that. And constantly firing on the fishermen and farmers. So in terms of cohesion, no, of course there isn't under those sorts of situations, those kinds of conditions. So the first thing I think is getting the West Bank and Gaza functioning properly. There are a few businessmen who are able to, a few people that are allowed to go from areas, businessmen who are able to go from areas, but that is to access businesses and the West Bank, not to stay within Israel. and they are very few and far between. Largely it's patients that only we go to help them through that water.
Thank you.
But back to the NGO question, Oxfam say they're giving food vouchers to so many thousand people. You can't eat a food voucher. Where's the food coming from? I mean, Gaza is just flat, nothing, not even a blade of grass can grow.
What comes in is produce. Well, a lot of it is Israeli produce you'll find in Gaza, and it's very hard not to buy that because one has only going to get. So this is one of the other issues, and one of the issues around boycotting internally is that one, the quality of food that comes in, if it's from Israel, is of better quality, obviously, because it's got everything going for it. So that's one really big issue apart from anything else. And this is what it's about, the idea of you can profit from the situation. Israel is profiting from the situation. The fuel that is now getting into Gaza is either from Egypt or from Israel. And the cheaper fuel that was being generated by the power plant, the electricity that was being generated by the power plant, is no longer accessible. So this is why it's a real concern about, and where the international community has a role to play, is to ensure that the reconstruction and the revitalisation that has to occur, and that can only occur if there isn't a separation policy between West Bank and Gaza, is allowed to have a kind of thriving, homegrown economy that will give other alternatives.
And on the accountability question, I mean, last time there was the Gold Report and, a huge report on the last war.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
after the report, where'd they go? In the bin. Nothing happened.
Yes, it has to be accompanied by political will. I mean, that's for sure. But the first thing is to ensure, because at the moment, human rights organisations aren't able to access. So both Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, for instance, haven't been able to access. There is a very good local organisation that actually works with the Goldstone report, the Palestine Centre for Human Rights, and they do excellent work. And there are a number of different human rights groups locally that do brilliant work. Obviously, there needs to be access. The UN rapporteur wasn't allowed, who I quoted in here, wasn't allowed to access via Israel. He had to go via Rafah. So certainly the international community needs to do a lot more to put pressure on Israel to allow that kind of access so that there can be a proper situation in reporting. But also what Israel has done is said that they're going to have their own process. And so you don't have the UK government taking a strong stand on this. They have an excuse, which is to say Israel has the same process that they're following up and we support that. So, I mean, I think there's a real role for us to ensure that we're writing to our MPs and we're putting pressure on the government to ensure that they are behind any legal moves that will hold Israel accountable, or anybody accountable that has broken international humanitarian law. And also to ensure that the kinds of weapons that have been going are not British weapons. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we can do that feed into that process.
And I was just looking at your photograph of the lemonade factory that was bombed in Gaza, which makes it all the more satisfying that SodaStream, the Israeli company, are being forced to pull out of Britain because of the boycott and divestment and sanctions campaign going on in Brighton. Every week those people have been there protesting about that company being there, and they've pulled out, which is fantastic. And I think, Veolia and other companies have been forced out, and that's what I think we can do. Rather than get angry, and well, need to get angry, but rather than shout at the telly, shout at the radio, join a BDS group, join Southampton Palestine Solidarity Campaign in Southampton, join Students of Palestine here in the university. This Saturday we're outside Sainsbury's in Portswood, asking people not to buy Israeli goods. And we give them a list of what there is in there. We say, please don't buy them. And that's what we can be doing. That's what we've been doing, and we need to put pressure. Boycott does affect Israel. It's talked about in Knesset quite a lot, about companies who are really feeling the effect. That's what we can do, and it makes you feel a lot better getting out and doing something than looking at this massacre that's gone on and not doing anything about it. So please join an organisation, get out there and let's try and do something to put pressure on Israel so that they become the pariah, or as they should be, of the world.
There is also a vote that's coming up in Parliament on statehood, on recognising Palestine as a state. Now that is a very symbolic move. It doesn't really mean anything in real terms. But given the UK's historic role in what has happened in Palestine after the British mandate, I think that the UK has a very specific role to play in actually recognising it, and it was shameful that they didn't do so in the first place. So one of the things you can also do is write to your MP and say, we expect you to be voting in favour of the mission to recognise Palestine. But if you do so, you must follow also those principles, because it won't mean anything unless it's also, the UK is very forceful in countering the separation policy and in ensuring the protection of Palestinians, not just the security for Israel, and ensuring that accountability is the criteria for intervention.